How does a civilization that shaped the world disappear for centuries? The Sumerians, nestled in the fertile floodplains of Mesopotamia, built the first cities, wrote the first words, and created systems of law that still echo through history. Yet for thousands of years, they were forgotten, buried beneath layers of earth as newer empires rose and fell. Their story is one of brilliance but also fragility. They pioneered innovations that changed the course of humanity, but they also faced challenges that proved insurmountable. Environmental collapse, political infighting, and external invasions, forces that toppled their great cities, serve as a cautionary tale for every civilization that followed. But this isn't just a story of decline, it's a story of rediscovery. Today, the Sumerians' legacy lives on, not only in the ideas they left behind, but in the lessons their struggles teach us. What caused the first civilization to fall, and how does their story reflect the challenges we face today? To answer these questions, we must start where all civilizations begin, with the land. The Sumerians were masters of their environment. They tamed the Tigris and Euphrates, transforming unpredictable floods into lifelines for their crops. They built vast canal systems that fed their cities, ensuring surplus harvests that supported a thriving population. But what they couldn't see, what no one could have predicted, was how these achievements would sow the seeds of their decline. Generations of irrigation left behind an invisible enemy, salt. As water evaporated from the fields, minerals accumulated in the soil, poisoning it slowly but relentlessly. At first they adapted, shifting from wheat to barley, a more salt-tolerant crop, but over time even barley began to fail. The land that had sustained them for centuries could no longer provide. Then came the droughts. Around 2200 BCE, rainfall became erratic and the rivers began to recede. Without enough water, their canals ran dry, their fields withered, and their harvests shrank. Famine followed, turning abundance into scarcity, and scarcity breeds desperation. The question remains, could they have acted differently? Sumerian texts contain prayers for rain and fertility, suggesting they recognized the crisis, but by the time the signs were clear, it may have been too late to adapt. Their irrigation systems, revolutionary in their prime, had locked them into practices that could not withstand the changes in their environment. The environmental collapse of Sumer wasn't a single event. It was a slow, grinding process. Their innovations had allowed them to flourish, but those same innovations became their undoing. As their fields failed, the foundations of their civilization began to crack, leaving them vulnerable to the next wave of challenges, conflict and conquest. As the fields of Sumer faltered, the cracks in their society deepened. The Sumerians were never a unified empire. They were a collection of fiercely independent city-states, Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and others, each ruled by its own king and devoted to its own patron god. For centuries, this rivalry had driven innovation and competition. But when scarcity struck, it turned neighbors into enemies. Wars erupted over control of dwindling resources. Canals, vital for irrigation and trade, were damaged or neglected as city fought against city. Once thriving trade routes became battlegrounds. The unity that might have helped them withstand environmental challenges dissolved into fragmentation. It was during this period of weakness that a new power emerged from the north. Sargon of Akkad, a visionary ruler, conquered the fractured city-states and forged the first empire. Under Akkadian rule, Sumerian culture was preserved and even celebrated. Their gods were worshipped, their language was used for religious and administrative purposes, and their innovations became the foundation of the Akkadian Empire. But Sumer was no longer the center of power. It had become a subject of history's first great conqueror. Even this new order was fragile. As the Akkadian Empire struggled with its own challenges, another wave of destruction swept through Mesopotamia. The Gutians, a nomadic people from the Zagros Mountains, descended on the region. Unlike Sargon, the Gutians brought no vision of governance or stability. Their invasions destabilized the region further, leaving Sumer's cities abandoned and its fields untended. The decline of Sumer wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow unraveling, driven by internal strife and external conquest. By the time the Gutians retreated, the first civilization was little more than a shadow of its former self. And yet, even as their political power faded, the Sumerians' ideas endured, carried forward by the empires that followed. For centuries, the Sumerians were forgotten. Their cities lay buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia, their language unreadable, their achievements reduced to myth. It wasn't until the 19th century that their story began to resurface, thanks to the work of adventurers and archaeologists who sought to uncover humanity's oldest past. In 1853, Austin Henry Layard unearthed the ruins of Ur. Among the rubble were tablets covered in strange symbols, cuneiform writing, though no one yet knew how to read it. At first, these discoveries were little more than curiosities. But as more ruins were uncovered, ziggurats rising from the dust, and as more tablets emerged, the true significance of these finds became clear. The Sumerians weren't a myth, they were real, and their civilization was extraordinary. Deciphering cuneiform was no easy task. It took decades of painstaking effort by scholars like Henry Rawlinson, who worked to decode the language of the Sumerians. When the tablets were finally read, they revealed a world both familiar and alien. Records of trade and agriculture, prayers to gods, and the first known work of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh, all emerged from these clay archives, bringing the Sumerians' voices back to life. The rediscovery of Sumer wasn't just an archaeological triumph, it was a revelation. It showed that many of the foundations of modern society, writing, urban planning, law, had been pioneered thousands of years ago in the cradle of civilization. What's more, it reminded us of how much we can lose. For centuries, the Sumerians were invisible, their story erased by time. Their rediscovery was a reminder that history's treasures are fragile, and their preservation is as much about remembering as it is about finding. When the last Sumerian cities fell, their achievements did not vanish. Civilizations rise and fall, but their ideas endure, carried forward by those who come after. The Sumerians left behind a legacy so foundational that its influence still resonates in our world today. Their greatest contribution was the invention of writing. What began as simple marks on clay to record trade evolved into cuneiform, a writing system that could capture stories, laws, and human thought. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first known literary masterpiece, emerged from these tablets. Its themes of ambition, loss, and the search for immortality still speak to us, a testament to the timeless nature of human questions. The Sumerians also laid the groundwork for organized governance. They codified laws, establishing principles of justice that formed the basis for later legal systems. Concepts like property rights and contracts, first written in Sumerian courts, became cornerstones of governance in Mesopotamia and beyond. Their technological innovations were equally profound. The wheel, one of humanity's most transformative inventions, revolutionized transport and trade. Their mastery of irrigation sustained their cities for centuries, even if it ultimately contributed to their decline. And their cities themselves, with temples at their heart, provided a blueprint for urban planning that influenced cultures across the ancient world. Even their gods outlived them. The Sumerian pantheon, Anu, Enlil, Inanna, became the foundation for the myths of the Babylonians, Assyrians, and others. Their religious ideas, deeply intertwined with governance and daily life, shaped the spiritual landscape of Mesopotamia for centuries. But their legacy isn't just about their successes, it's also a warning. Their environmental mismanagement and political divisions left them vulnerable to collapse, lessons that echo in our own time. The Sumerians remind us that even the most advanced societies are fragile, and the choices we make today will shape the future we leave behind. The Sumerians didn't just create a civilization, they created a foundation for humanity itself. Writing, law, cities, these weren't just their achievements, they are their enduring gift to the world. The Sumerians were the first to build a civilization, and they were the first to watch one fall. Their story isn't just about their achievements, it's about the choices they made and the consequences they faced. And it's a story that still holds a mirror to us today. They remind us that innovation alone isn't enough. Their mastery of irrigation sustained their cities for centuries, but when it led to soil degradation, they couldn't adapt quickly enough. Their political rivalries, once a source of growth, became their undoing in times of crisis. Even their success in building great cities made them targets for conquest. But their rediscovery thousands of years later teaches us something just as important. Ideas endure. The laws they wrote, the stories they told, the cities they built, these survived long after the Sumerians themselves were gone. History remembers what we choose to preserve. So what do we take from their story? That greatness is fragile and progress without responsibility is dangerous. That unity is as vital as innovation, and that every civilization, no matter how advanced, is shaped by the choices it makes. The Sumerians were the first chapter of humanity's shared story. Their achievements are our inheritance, and their struggles are our warning. The question is, what kind of legacy will we leave? Will we learn from their triumphs and failures? Or will we, like them, leave behind only ruins for others to rediscover? The Sumerians remind us that history is not a distant past, it is a guide, and their story is one we must remember.